In 1981, 750 million people watched a 20-year-old woman marry into the most powerful royal family on Earth. Cameras flashed. Bells rang. History applauded. But what the world didn't see was that the marriage was already broken. Diana was already struggling with bulimia, depression, and self-harm. Many people think she was chosen, protected, and lucky. She wasn't. This is the story of how a fairy tale slowly became a psychological prison. The fairy tale didn't collapse years later. It cracked almost immediately. Within months of the wedding, Diana realized the truth she had never been warned about. She wasn't marrying for love. She was entering a system where emotion was inconvenient and silence was expected. Charles remained distant. Camilla never left the picture. And the young woman the world adored was already being emotionally abandoned inside her own marriage. By her early 20s, Diana was struggling with bulimia. Not as a rumor. As a coping mechanism. When her voice carried no weight and her feelings had no place, control over her body became the only control she had left. She would later admit that the disorder ruled her life for years, hidden beneath couture gowns and rehearsed smiles. The loneliness deepened after childbirth. After William. Then after Harry. Postnatal depression followed, but support did not. The palace had procedures for appearances, not for emotional collapse. Therapy was discouraged. Vulnerability was treated as weakness. Outside the palace gates, the pressure multiplied. Diana became the most photographed woman on Earth. Hundreds of cameras chased her daily. Grocery runs. School drop-offs. Hospital visits. She was watched constantly, yet understood by no one. At night, when the lights went out and the cameras were gone, the silence was unbearable. The applause was over. The marriage was cold. And the woman the world believed was living a dream was quietly falling apart. This wasn't scandal yet. This was erosion. Diana did not grow up surrounded by emotional safety. She grew up surrounded by absence. Born in 1961 into the Spencer family, she came from British aristocracy, but not from stability. Her childhood home was large, orderly, and emotionally cold. Her parents' marriage collapsed early. When Diana was still a child, her mother left. For years, Diana believed it was her fault. That belief stayed with her far longer than anyone realized. She was shy, sensitive, desperate to be liked. Teachers noticed that she struggled academically, but excelled at something else, reading people. She sensed moods. She tried to soothe tension. She learned early that love had to be earned, not assumed. When conflict appeared, she didn't fight. She withdrew. After the divorce, Diana remained with her father. The house was quieter. He was distant. The sense of abandonment hardened into a pattern. If she could be good enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, maybe people would stay. She never imagined herself as royalty. She worked as a nanny. Then as a kindergarten assistant. She preferred children to adults. With children, affection was simple. Honest. Conditional rules didn't exist. There were no expectations of perfection. What Diana never learned in those years was how to protect herself emotionally. She learned how to please. How to adapt. How to disappear when needed. So when she met Prince Charles, the imbalance felt familiar. He was older. Confident. Emotionally reserved. She was young, eager, and searching for validation. The attention felt like rescue. The proposal felt like belonging. But it wasn't belonging. It was repetition. Diana entered the royal world carrying the same unhealed wound from childhood, the fear of being left. The fear of not being enough. The need to be chosen again and again. That wound would shape every decision she made next. It would make her endure silence longer than she should have. It would make rejection feel catastrophic. And it would make the collapse of her marriage feel less like a surprise, and more like destiny repeating itself. She wasn't weak. She was unprepared. Diana didn't enter the royal family step by step. She was dropped into it. At 19, she moved from a quiet, ordinary life into one of the most rigid institutions on earth. There was no gradual training. No emotional preparation. No one sat her down to explain how isolation worked inside the palace walls. She was expected to learn by observation. And to make no mistakes. From the beginning, the imbalance was clear. Charles was experienced, shaped by decades of royal conditioning. Diana was young, emotionally open, and searching for connection. He valued tradition. She valued affection. He retreated inward. She reached outward. The gap between them widened almost immediately. Publicly, she was praised. Privately, she was corrected. How to stand. How to speak. When to smile. When not to ask questions. Every gesture was monitored. Every reaction was noted. Diana quickly understood that spontaneity, the thing people loved her for, was a liability inside the system. Emotion was considered instability. Sensitivity was considered weakness. She tried to adapt. She studied protocol late into the night. She rehearsed appearances. She learned to read rooms before entering them. She smiled even when she was confused. She apologized when she didn't know what she'd done wrong. But there was no manual for loneliness. The royal household functioned like a machine. Staff rotated. Advisors changed. But the emotional distance remained constant. Diana had no peers. No one her age. No one she could trust with doubts or fear. When she struggled, the unspoken message was clear: endure quietly. The engagement period should have been a time of reassurance. Instead, it amplified her insecurity. Charles was often absent. When he was present, he was emotionally unavailable. Diana sensed she was competing with something she could never replace, even if no one said the name out loud. Still, she went forward. The wedding approached with unstoppable momentum. There was no pause button. No space to reconsider. The scale of the event itself became a trap. Millions were watching. Expectations hardened into inevitability. Walking away was no longer an option anyone would accept. So Diana stepped into the role she believed was required of her. She became compliant, cheerful, agreeable. She absorbed discomfort without protest. She convinced herself that love would grow later. That patience would be rewarded. That sacrifice was part of the job. But inside, something fractured. The more she tried to fit the role, the more she disappeared inside it. The palace demanded silence. Her instincts demanded expression. And every time she chose silence, the cost increased. This was the beginning of her own path, though she didn't know it yet. Because once a person realizes they are unseen, they eventually search for a way to be heard. Even if the price is exile. The wedding in 1981 was not just a ceremony. It was a global event. More than 700 million people watched as Diana walked down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral. The dress. The carriage. The bells. Everything was designed to signal triumph. A young bride. A future king. A nation reassured. For the public, the fairy tale had officially begun. And Diana delivered exactly what the world wanted. She smiled easily. She waved naturally. She connected without effort. Unlike the rigid formality people expected from royalty, she leaned in. She listened. She touched hands. She knelt to speak to children at eye level. Cameras loved her because she didn't perform distance. She performed presence. Very quickly, something shifted. Crowds grew larger for her than for Charles. Headlines focused on her clothes, her expressions, her warmth. She became a fashion icon almost by accident, but a cultural figure by necessity. Where the monarchy felt distant, Diana felt human. Where tradition felt cold, she felt accessible. The public called her the people's princess long before it became official language. Inside the palace, that popularity created tension. Diana's visibility became a problem. Her relatability disrupted hierarchy. Her empathy blurred boundaries the institution preferred to keep intact. The more she was loved outside, the more isolated she felt inside. Approval from the world could not compensate for emotional absence at home. Every appearance required effort. Every smile came with cost. The schedule was relentless. Tours, galas, hospitals, charities. Diana learned to move through crowds with grace while carrying exhaustion silently. There was no room for rest. No allowance for fragility. When she faltered, the expectation was to recover instantly. The contrast became unbearable. On stage, she was adored. Off stage, she was ignored. At home, conversations were strained. Distance hardened. Emotional neglect became routine. Diana began to realize that her public role was expanding while her private world was shrinking. The more she succeeded as a symbol, the more she failed as a wife, at least by the standards imposed on her. She internalized the conflict. If she could not be loved privately, she would be useful publicly. If she could not find safety at home, she would offer it to strangers. This logic would later define her humanitarian work, but at the time, it was survival. The world saw glamour. What it didn't see was depletion. Diana was becoming famous faster than she was becoming safe. The applause grew louder, but the foundation beneath her feet weakened. She was learning to give endlessly, without learning how to protect herself. This was the peak. And it was already unstable. The breakdown didn't happen in public. It happened quietly, behind closed doors, while the world was applauding. By the time Diana was widely admired as a symbol of grace and compassion, her inner life was already unraveling. The bulimia had become constant. Not occasional. Not situational. It followed her daily routine, intertwined with anxiety, self-blame, and a growing sense of worthlessness. She later described it not as a disorder, but as a response, something that took over when she felt unheard. Food became control. Then punishment. Then relief. Then shame. It was a cycle that repeated itself relentlessly, hidden beneath couture dresses and public composure. Staff noticed weight fluctuations. Rumors circulated. But acknowledgement never came with help. The institution did not know how to respond to suffering that couldn't be corrected with protocol. Emotionally, the marriage continued to deteriorate. Charles remained distant, preoccupied, and emotionally aligned elsewhere. Diana tried to explain how isolated she felt. She tried to ask for reassurance. What she received instead was detachment. Conversations ended quickly. Needs were minimized. The message, spoken or not, was consistent: endure. When Diana gave birth to Prince William, the pressure intensified. The world celebrated an heir. Inside, she sank deeper into postnatal depression. After Harry's birth, the depression returned with force. She was overwhelmed, exhausted, and emotionally alone, while still expected to perform warmth and stability in public. Support never materialized. Mental health was not discussed openly inside the royal structure. Seeking help was seen as weakness. Therapy was discouraged. Vulnerability was something to manage privately, not acknowledge publicly. Diana learned to suffer silently, because speaking only increased the distance. At the same time, media scrutiny became relentless. She was photographed constantly, leaving homes, entering cars, walking her children to school. The volume was unprecedented. Paparazzi waited outside gates for hours. A single moment of fatigue became headline material. A tear became speculation. Her pain became content. The contradiction was cruel. She was surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. She was praised endlessly, yet never reassured. She was visible everywhere, yet unseen where it mattered most. The more pressure mounted, the more Diana internalized failure. She believed she was the problem. That she was too emotional. Too sensitive. Too much. The narrative slowly shifted inside her mind. If she were stronger, this wouldn't hurt. If she were quieter, this would pass. It didn't. What Diana was experiencing was not weakness. It was erosion. The slow breakdown of a person forced to live without emotional oxygen. She was surviving day by day, appearance by appearance, while her inner world collapsed. And the most dangerous part was this: no one around her seemed alarmed. Eventually, the silence broke. What had been implied became undeniable. Camilla was not a shadow from the past. She was present. Persistent. Emotionally central. Diana was not imagining betrayal, she was living inside it. And the most destabilizing part was not infidelity itself, it was the normalization of it. The expectation that Diana would accept a triangle and keep smiling. Later, she would say the line that crystallized everything: there were 3 people in the marriage. It was not bitterness speaking. It was clarity. As the truth settled in, Diana's internal conflict sharpened. She could no longer blame herself entirely. The problem wasn't that she was too sensitive. The problem was that she was incompatible with a system that required emotional suppression to function. The more she understood this, the less willing she became to disappear. At the same time, the media turned her private pain into a public spectacle. Paparazzi followed relentlessly. Stories multiplied. Every strained expression was interpreted. Every absence became rumor. Headlines framed her as unstable, dramatic, difficult. The narrative shifted subtly but decisively, from beloved princess to problem to be managed. Inside the palace, trust evaporated. Diana felt watched. Conversations were reported. Vulnerability became risky. The institution closed ranks, prioritizing preservation over care. When Diana sought understanding, she encountered containment. When she sought honesty, she encountered strategy. The pressure intensified. She began to push back, not loudly, but deliberately. She stopped pretending everything was fine. She withdrew cooperation when it came at the cost of her dignity. She chose causes that mattered to her, even when they complicated royal optics. Each small act of autonomy was a quiet rebellion. The marriage deteriorated publicly now. Separation rumors circulated. Allies chose sides. What had once been a private implosion became a national conversation. Diana was no longer just a wife struggling behind closed doors, she was a symbol of emotional truth challenging an institution built on restraint. The cost was heavy. Isolation deepened. Invitations changed. Access narrowed. Diana was slowly edged out, not formally, but functionally. She felt it in the pauses, the omissions, the lack of protection. Being loved by the public no longer translated into safety. And yet, something critical had shifted. For the first time, Diana stopped trying to earn acceptance at any price. She recognized that survival inside silence was no longer possible. Speaking carried consequences, but silence was lethal. This was the moment she crossed an invisible line. She was no longer merely enduring pain. She was naming it. That choice would cost her comfort, privacy, and protection. But it would also give her something she had never truly had before: agency. The collapse was no longer just something happening to her. It was something she was about to confront, on her own terms. The turning point did not arrive as a single dramatic moment. It arrived as a decision. By the mid-1990s, Diana understood something clearly for the first time: remaining silent was destroying her faster than speaking ever could. The isolation, the constant distortion of her character, the quiet erasure, none of it was temporary. It was structural. And it would not change unless she did. So she chose exposure over suffocation. In 1995, Diana agreed to an interview that would alter the balance of power between herself and the institution she had married into. It was not impulsive. It was calculated. She knew the cost. She accepted it anyway. When the interview aired, the world didn't see scandal. It saw truth spoken without ornament. Diana described bulimia not as weakness, but as a response to emotional neglect. She described loneliness not as exaggeration, but as daily reality. And when she spoke the line that defined the collapse, "There were 3 of us in this marriage," she did not sound angry. She sounded resolved. For the first time, she reclaimed authorship of her own story. The reaction was immediate. Public sympathy surged. Viewers recognized pain that had been carefully hidden for years. But inside the royal structure, the consequences were swift. Trust was declared broken. Access narrowed further. Protection was withdrawn. Diana had crossed from tolerated presence to liability. She understood what that meant. From that moment on, she was no longer negotiating her place. She was preparing for independence. What followed was not freedom, but transition. Diana began to redefine herself beyond the role she had been given at 19. She disengaged from expectations that demanded obedience without care. She chose causes that reflected her values rather than institutional priorities. AIDS patients. Landmine victims. Children the world preferred not to see. Where others kept distance, she made contact. Where protocol advised restraint, she chose compassion. This wasn't image management. It was alignment. Her work became more focused. More personal. She was no longer trying to prove worth through performance. She was expressing purpose through action. The same sensitivity that once overwhelmed her became the source of her strength. Internally, something shifted. Diana began therapy openly. She spoke about mental health without shame. She acknowledged patterns she had lived inside for decades: abandonment, self-blame, emotional hunger. Naming them didn't erase the pain, but it changed her relationship to it. Pain became information, not identity. She was still watched. Still judged. Still followed relentlessly. But she was no longer invisible to herself. The marriage formally ended, But the psychological separation had already occurred. Diana stepped into a new phase, not protected, not fully safe, but conscious. For the first time, her decisions were guided by internal clarity rather than external approval. The cost was real. She lost institutional shelter. She lost controlled privacy. She became vulnerable in new ways. But she also gained something she had never possessed inside the palace walls: direction. This was not a rebirth wrapped in optimism. It was a hard-won recalibration. Diana had learned that survival required truth. That healing required boundaries. And that being loved by millions meant nothing if she could not hear her own voice. The fairy tale was over. The woman had arrived. After the separation, Diana's life became quieter on paper, but heavier in reality. She no longer had the protection of the institution. The structure that once confined her had also shielded her. Now, she moved through the world exposed, without buffers, without intermediaries, without walls thick enough to stop intrusion. The scrutiny did not fade. It intensified. But something inside her had changed. For the first time, Diana's public actions were no longer filtered through royal expectation. She chose causes based on instinct, not optics. And those instincts consistently led her toward people who were avoided, feared, or ignored. When she shook hands with AIDS patients in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it wasn't symbolic. At a time when misinformation fueled panic, physical contact itself was radical. She did not lecture. She did not posture. She sat. She listened. She touched. The gesture alone rewrote public perception. Later, her work with landmine victims went further. She walked through active minefields, not as spectacle, but as witness. She knelt beside amputees. She asked questions others avoided. Her presence drew attention to policies and consequences that statistics had failed to humanize. This was not charity as performance. It was empathy as method. Diana's humanitarian focus revealed something consistent. She was drawn to pain that mirrored her own experiences. Isolation. Stigmatization. Silence. She understood what it meant to be reduced to a headline, to be spoken about rather than spoken with. That understanding shaped the way she showed up. At the same time, her personal life remained complicated. She sought connection, safety, affection. Sometimes wisely. Sometimes not. The need to be seen never fully disappeared. But unlike before, she was no longer confusing attention with belonging. She was learning, slowly, to distinguish care from control. Public affection never left her. Crowds still gathered. Letters still arrived by the thousands. The world continued to project meaning onto her presence. But Diana no longer tried to carry those projections as responsibility. She showed up where she felt useful, not where she felt adored. Her legacy, however, would extend far beyond specific campaigns. She changed the emotional vocabulary of public life. She normalized vulnerability in spaces that had long rewarded detachment. She made compassion visible without moralizing it. She demonstrated that power could kneel, listen, and touch without diminishing itself. The monarchy adapted in her wake. Public expectations shifted. Humanitarian work became less distant, more embodied. Diana did not live long enough to see the full reach of that influence. But its traces are unmistakable. She was not flawless. She was not always protected. She did not win in the traditional sense. What she did was reframe what strength could look like. Not invulnerability, but presence. And that is why her absence still feels active. Diana was never destroyed by fame. She was worn down by silence. For years, the world celebrated her image while misunderstanding her reality. She was admired, photographed, adored, but rarely protected. What her life revealed is uncomfortable. Being loved by millions does not guarantee being cared for by the people closest to you. Her story is not a warning against ambition or visibility. It is a reminder that emotional neglect, when sustained long enough, can fracture even the most compassionate person. Diana did not suffer because she was weak. She suffered because she was asked to endure without being heard. And yet, she chose not to harden. Instead of withdrawing, she leaned into empathy. Instead of becoming cynical, she became present. She took the pain that isolated her and used it to reach those who lived in isolation every day. That choice did not erase her struggles, but it gave them direction. Diana's life challenges a familiar illusion, That strength means endurance without complaint. She showed something quieter and more difficult. That strength can mean naming pain, setting boundaries, and refusing to disappear for the comfort of others. She did not escape tragedy. But she refused to become numb to it. In the end, Diana leaves behind more than memory. She leaves a question that does not fade with time. Are you living according to expectations that silence you, or are you listening closely enough to protect your own voice? So what's your story?